Good afternoon to the folks who are just joining us. We'll get started in just a minute. Welcome. All right. So it's about 1 minute after. I'm certain that additional people will be joining us. Allison, did you want to say anything on HRC's behalf or All Children, All Families before we start?
Sure. Let me get my video to start. Thanks so much, Robin. And hi, everyone. I'm Allison Del Percio, the director of All Children, All Families. And I just want to start with expressing a lot of gratitude to each of you for spending some time during what I'm sure is a busy Tuesday to come and learn and listen to this wonderful panel of leaders that we've that Robin has worked with to pull together what I'm sure is going to be a very informative and helpful panel. I'll let Robin and all of our panelists handle introductions. I will be in the chat and can help with any tech issues that come up or any questions you may have about All Children, All Families. But that's all I got for you because I know you're here to hear from all of them. But it's good to see you all here. Overwhelming interest and response in this webinar, so we're really excited for the discussion. And back over to you, Robin.
Great, thank you. Well, welcome everybody. We're going to take care of a little bit of a housekeeping stuff before we jump into the panel. So we wanted to let folks know that closed captions are available. You turn them on by clicking the closed caption in the control panel at the bottom of your screen. For accuracy purposes, the closed caption accuracy is about a 3-second delay, just so they can make sure that they've heard the full import of what we wanted to say. If you have any issues, technical issues as the webinar progresses, email ACAF, which is All Children, All Families, at hrc.org. They have, Tamari is monitoring that email, and Tamari can help you if something comes up. So let's just do first we're gonna do some introductions, and then we're gonna do some housekeeping. So I'm gonna turn it over to the panelists to ask them. They've all agreed to introduce themselves, and I'm going to go from right back to left because Davi's going to do some ground rules at the end. So Weston, can we start with you?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me and being a part of the discussion today. My name is Weston Charles Gallo. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I am 21 years old and I'm from Kansas City, Missouri. I really began advocacy when I realized that there was a crisis within LGBTQ youth in the foster care system to be provided the resources and the support that they need to be successful. And so I will turn it over to the next panelist. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Weston. We're so glad you're here. Justina?
Hey everyone, my name is Justina Hall. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'm in Richmond, Virginia. I'm coming to y'all with lived experience as well as experience as a direct service provider and someone who has facilitated support groups for LGBTQ youth, queer and trans youth, and just someone who really enjoys being in collaborative learning spaces. So I'm really happy to be here with y'all today.
Thanks, Justina. Welcome. Nakaya?
Hi, everyone. My name is Nakaya. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I'm coming from Maryland. I started advocacy because of my lived experience. It made me so passionate about everything and wanting to help other people that were going through the same things as me. And I currently work at a Department of Social Services, working with LGBTQ youth. So yeah, that's all I got. And I'll pass it to Davi.
Thanks, Nakaya. Welcome. Davi?
Hi everyone, welcome. Thanks for being here with all of us today. My name is Davi. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'm 24, almost 25 years old, and I'm calling from Oakland, California. And I've been doing advocacy work and facilitating groups for non-binary, transgender, non-conforming, identified preteens, teens, and also for their parents, caregivers, grandparents, and leading trainings since around high school. So for many years through Gender Spectrum. And it's so great to be here with all of you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Davi. Welcome. And I'm Robin McKalen. I've been working with lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer questioning, two-spirit, same gender loving pansexual, flexual, not straight, not labeling, straightish, straight so far, straight with options, straight but stuff happens, gender bending, bi gender, pangender, agender, asexual, non-binary, and other sexual and gender minority youth for about just close to 30 years. I'm going to be moderating today, so I'm not going to be talking very much, but I like to start with the litany of the language, not because I have any expectation that y'all will remember that, but really to make the point that the language is changing and how people, especially young people, are describing themselves and their experiences may be very different than many of us grew up with. Fortunately, we got to know the basics, but in general, we don't have to so much keep up as we have to keep open. And that's, I think, one of the lessons and that we'll learn today, that we can't necessarily keep up with all of the different identities and knowing them all in advance, but we can stay open to the understanding that each young person knows who they are, and that we can accept and respect that even if we don't understand it. Davi has agreed to talk a little bit about the group agreements before we jump into the panel. So Davi.
Yes, so for our group agreements, quickly go through them. So our first one is intention versus impact. And we can think about that with an example of if you have the intention to not spill a hot beverage on somebody while you're walking by them, but the impact is that it accidentally does spill on them, maybe if you tripped or whatnot, there is that impact of that they got hurt. And so even though your intention was to not spill any hot beverage on them. And so you want to make sure to follow that through to apologize, help out however you can to help make it better, instead of just walking away saying your intention wasn't to hurt them. Second is our privacy confidentiality. So we want to make sure that whatever you hear in this space about our stories stays in this space. We want to make sure that we are staying confidential. You can share out of this group key points that you learned, just not from our personal stories, and making sure we don't share names outside of the space. Third is take space and give space. So we want to make sure to hear from everyone who is wanting to share. Just we ask that you please be mindful about how much space you're taking, just so everyone gets a turn. Self-care, whatever that looks like for you during this hour, please make sure to give it to yourself. And safety. For the Q&A portion, any questions that come up, we as panelists are able to make the choice to not answer those for whatever reason. So we just wanted to put that out there. Thank you all for being here. Those are our group agreements.
Thanks, Davi. So we're going to start with, we do want to make this as interactive as possible. So we're going to be using two tools to make this interactive. The first is Zoom, which many people are much more comfortable with now. And the second is Mentimeter. And so we're going to start with an activity that has us using those tools, and then we're going to jump into the panel. So the first activity, and this is just the housekeeping stuff. Sorry, I forgot this was in there, that the lines are all muted. You can answer your questions. You can ask your questions through the Q&A if you want to, or use the chat. And if you use the chat, please make sure that it's all panelists and attendees. That way, everybody can see the questions that are coming up and everybody can see the answers. That some of the questions we may answer, live verbally, some of the questions we may answer in the chat. So we encourage you to use the chat. If at any point you lose connection, email acaf@HRC. Please don't forget to fill out the webinar evaluation. It really does make a difference for us. The evaluation, and this will go into the chat box either both now and later at the end of the webinar. There's where the link is to the evaluation, and all of the handouts, including the slide deck, when a youth comes out resource, so a short resource on how to respond when a young person comes out to you, and then 6 easy do's and don'ts that the panelists help put together to summarize some of the points that they want to make or they'll be making over the course of the webinar. You can always learn more about HRC and the All Children, All Families program on their website. And so let's start by get the interactiveness going by starting in the chat room. And so in the chat, please put in your name, your pronouns, your location, what your role is, and you can put questions in there now or you can do the questions later. And one of the things you'll notice about me in doing this is that I'm not all that tech savvy. So I can't see the chat, but all the panelists can see the chat. And so they will be responding. So just take a second, your name, your pronouns, your location, and your role, and we'll save the questions for a little bit later. Okay. And folks, the panelists can start reading some of those out as they come through. We'll just do this for about a minute. Are people responding in the chat? So where are they calling from? Where are they coming from?
Super fast. We got Denver, Grace in Denver, who's a research associate. We got Adrian Nolan, who's in Buchanan, work with the Buchanan and Andrew County Children's Division in St. Joseph, Missouri.
Delaware, Chicago, Baltimore.
Wow, they're really
Being
flying
from
by.
Maryland,
Angela,
Maryland,
West Michigan, Washington,
Indianapolis,
San
Vermont,
Diego.
a bunch of folks from California.
I think I saw Texas in there, Texas Stand Up. That's my
Kentucky.
my home state.
Yep. Wow.
Sacramento.
You see Kansas
Detroit.
City.
Did you see Kansas City?
I did, yes.
All right.
Hello.
All right, Kansas City.
Alaska,
Texas, Portland, Oregon, say it right.
Chicago.
Bay Area, St. Paul, Minnesota. All right. Thank you all. That's really great. It's so exciting to see people from so many parts of the country participating. Michigan, Northern Michigan, Seneca Falls, New York. Yep. Well, welcome to everybody. We're very, very glad that you're here. And remember, you can use the chat room all through the course of this conversation, that you can make sure you do it to all panelists and attendees. If you do all panelists, the only people that can see it are the six of us that are on the webinar. But if you do all panelists and attendees, then everybody can see it. And we'll be responding as we go through. So thank you for doing that. We're now going to move on to a poll. And we're only actually going to do one poll today. And the reason we're doing this poll is to get a sense from the folks who are here, what your level of expertise is. This is an anonymous poll, so nobody gets sort of outed by this. But what we're going to ask you to do is where would you place your expertise regarding LGBTQ plus youth concerns, issues, and needs? You're a beginner, you know the basics, you feel competent, or you're an expert. And I'm going to ask Tamari to launch the poll, and we'll see where the folks are in the.
I can do that for you. Just give me 1 second.
Okay, thank you, Allison. Wow, there's 376 folks online. Okay, so where would you place your expertise? Beginner, basics, competent, or expert?
Looks like we have about 3/4 of our participants responding, so we can give you a few more seconds.
Yeah. Okay, and you can share that whenever you're ready, Allison.
Sure.
All right, so this is really helpful to know that, you know, the majority of folks are sort of in between basics and feeling comfortable and competent. There's a few people in the beginner range, and there's a few people in the expert range. I would say that everybody that's on the call, and you know, obviously the young people on the call have the most expertise because they have the most lived experience. But there's also probably folks on the call who also have lived experience, and that there's folks who've been doing this work for a while. So we recognize there's a lot of expertise out there, and feel free to share your thoughts and comments in the chat room as we go through the seminar. Use the chat because it's a great way to continue the conversation. So thank you for doing that. And then we're going to do one more thing before we get to the panel. We're using a new technique. Some of you might know have used this before, and some of you might not. you're going to need either a smartphone or a separate tab on your computer. And you're going to go to menti.com and you're going to enter the code 4247-9386, and they'll put that in the chat. And here's the question. The first question that we're going to ask is, what are you already doing to support the LGBTQ youth you serve? And we're going to ask a similar kind of question at the end to see what additions came about from listening to the stories of the young people on the call. So what are you already doing to support the LGBTQ youth you serve? So I'm going to stop sharing here and go over to the Mentimeter. So you can see what people are already doing. All right. And maybe folks can help me read some of this. Trying my best to listen and learn, being open, teaching the church about using respectful language, using correct pronouns, child preparation group for LGBTQ youth in foster care, specific programming, free gender affirming trainings to staff in residential, juvenile justice facilities, a professional peer with lived experience as a queer youth young adult, yay. Asking for, respecting, and using preferred pronouns, or actually, using. I'm going to just stop there for a second because I think trainings are a great opportunity to do a little tweaking on language. So people don't have preferred pronouns; they have pronouns, right? And so it's not something that we prefer; it's just who we are. So I am a she, her, and so asking for, respecting, and using the individual's pronouns just as a way of sort of tweaking that. A little bit, being a good listener and encouraging caregivers, creating safe and affirming, challenging myself, attending meetings like this, lots of HRC training, liaison with state coordinator, respecting self-identification, listening and learning, ensuring that foster parents are prepared. This is great. And one of the things that will happen afterwards is I will get a copy of this. And so I will send this on to the folks at HRC, and they can make that available. So if you want to be able to see some of the things that you and other folks are doing, being my authentic self, listening to people's experiences and valuing their voices, using my pronouns in my email signature, working with my church on resources and creating a safe space, being supportive and affirming, advocating. Great. This is fabulous. We can't read them all just because there's, like 400 of you responding in this, but this is just wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, let me get out of there. All righty. So I think I appreciate that. And it gives us a sense of what people are already doing and where some of the gaps might be. And so I think that at this point, it makes the most sense to turn it over to the people with the most experience. So the first question that we're asking the panelists, and they'll be able to answer in any order that they'd like. And then, so we're gonna ask this question to get it started, and then we'll use the questions that come in through the chat room. So
and Robin, you're still sharing your screen. So
yes, I'm gonna stop in just a second.
Cool.
So I'm gonna stop there. And so, somebody asked in the chat room if the training will be available later as they have a court hearing to attend shortly. And the answer is yes, it'll be posted on the HRC ACAF website later. Okay, so the good, the bad, and the ugly. Who would like to start?
Then you're on mute, Nakia.
I was just saying, wow, nobody's gonna start. Okay, I'll go.
Oh, dang. I didn't mean to set you up like that.
I wasn't gonna say anything, but the good, the bad, and the ugly. So what I would say, honestly, from my experience is that I kind of got all of those, but I think I'm fortunate and privileged enough to have most of the bad and the ugly be through like a third party point of view instead of my own experience. I always say that I escaped the system unscathed because I was a very just quiet kid. And I tended to like just kind of sit back and observe things. So I saw the way that my LGBTQ identifying peers were treated, and that determined, you know, my next move. Like I was just kind of watching and seeing how the system interacted with them. And I honestly didn't even realize that my LGBTQ identity could be such an important factor to how I was getting treated in care until like maybe a year before I aged out, maybe not even a year, like a couple of months or so before I aged out, when the Department of Social Services that I was in started like working with LGBTQ youth and taking on projects that supported LGBTQ youth. So, I mean, the good was that I got out unscathed. The bad was that some of my peers did not. And the ugly was also that some of my peers did not. It was seeing the way that everybody was treated and having to realize that, well, not even realize, but thinking and accepting that my identity didn't matter to who I was being served by.
Do you want to give any examples of some of your peers' experiences, Nikaya, of things that you wished had been done differently for them?
Oh yeah. So I was in and out of like group homes and stuff throughout my foster care experience. I only had like one foster home, and I always say that this work is super important because a lot of social workers and people that work with foster youth think that it's kind of an optional thing because they don't think that they'll ever really get an LGBTQ identifying youth. But the work is important because LGBTQ youth are overrepresented in systems of care, and because every peer that I met in all the group homes was queer identifying. We were a bunch of gay children. So it was just like watching them interact and like explore their identities through each other. Like I know a lot of the girls dated and like explored their identities, explored gender non-conforming styles. And it was freeing because unfortunately, a lot of the times that LGBTQ youth are put in the system has to do with their identity. And like it was a bunch of teenage girls who were kicked out of their homes because they couldn't be who they are, who are now getting the opportunity to live away from their parents and explore their identities in a different way. And seeing how staff responded and treated them like really made me kind of retreat into myself about my own identity and my own exploration. They brought their own views to work, and they tried to what's the word I'm looking for? They tried to like inflict those views onto the youth, and they just a lot of like things that are honestly just because that in itself is inappropriate, but then they're bringing like their religious beliefs and stuff into it and condemning the girls for just trying to exist and see who they were. And yeah, that was my experience. I feel like that, did I answer your question?
No, that's great. And Kristen asked, and I think you said this, you felt like you had to hide who you were because you saw how other people were treated. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Nikaya. Who would like to speak? Weston?
I can go next. So I entered the foster care system due to my biological parents like not accepting or supporting me for my identity. You know, there was some neglect involved, and also it was just, you know, overall it was just a very hostile environment. So before I met my dad, like while I was in care, I really kind of relate back to what was previously said, that I kind of found myself like masking who I was and like living my life as a chameleon, trying to like kind of like blend in and go with the flow, just because I knew that I was from a very rural community. You know, the population was like 859 people. So like being gay and being Black was like a no-no. And so it was very hard for me to like wrap around myself, like being gay, being biracial, you know, being a teenager, and then trying to find my forever family. And so I, with, you know, multiple, you know, foster care placements, hospitalizations, you know, group homes and things like that, you know, I was in a residential facility due to them not being able to find an affirming placement, you know, because I was LGBTQ and I was Black, and, you know, they kind of feared that, you know, I would be a predator or that I would turn the other kids gay. And so there's a lot of these, you know, underlining factors that happened like before I was even in care. So like, it was so weird to me, like I was being discriminated before I entered care. And then now I'm in care where I'm supposed to feel supported, you know, and trying to find a forever family, I was also discriminated against too. So it felt like I had no one really on my side. And I feel like my caseworker had a really hard time supporting me, you know, and listening to what I was saying. You know, I think that my caseworkers specifically, because they didn't support or they didn't really know how to support, therefore they press mental illness so hard. So instead, you know, I'm saying that I am feeling helpless or I'm feeling this way. Oh, let's get you into a therapy session, or let's hospitalize you. And so instead of listening to what I needed, They just
Mhm.
kind of dismissed it all.
Mhm. Right.
So,
I hear that. Wow. Okay. Thank you, Weston.
of course.
Davi or Justina? Justina, go ahead.
Yeah, I can take this from a perspective. I really appreciate everything that Nakai and Weston are saying. And I want to kind of highlight what they're saying from my experience as someone who served as like a peer navigator in a host home program for young LGBTQ folks ages 18 to 25, where majority of those young folks were 18, aging out of foster care. And they felt unsupported by case managers, social workers. So this holistic effort, right, that we created to, you know, have host homes within the community to, you know, so that young people could create family, you know, create their chosen family, their circles in the way that they'd like to, and also have roofs over their head and really be connected into the Richmond community. It was hard because even though we were working from a trauma-informed lens, you know, I'm really happy that everyone is here today, but as young people with lived experience, right, as panelists, we know that people come to these trainings, right, and still do harm when they do their work. And so it's really hard to sometimes overcome that when you're trying to, you know, break a cycle. So I will say that kind of fits into the bad and the ugly of like the amount of distrust that young people have now, just with social workers and case managers and all of that as a whole because of the child welfare system. So when trying to even do that outside of a system or on a grassroots level, it is hard because of the limitations, right, that people, you know, put on their learning of LGBTQIA identities. And I think that the good, though, right, is the fact that these webinars are happening, that so many people are here today, so many people are engaged in hearing these stories, and so many people, you know, are here, like you said, Robin, with lived experience as well. And I was able to get my position as a service provider because of lived experience with housing instability. So it's like, it's really cool to start seeing that too, to start seeing folks like Davi and Weston and Nakaya, like in these spaces as folks with lived experience, but also facilitating support groups, also being in these spaces. So I think that's actually the good that comes from it, is these conversations that get to be had and the people that show up every time.
Great. Thank you, Justina. Davi?
Hi, yeah, so I have lived experience from prior to coming out. I was a part of the foster system as a 6-year-old. And then, but I have and then I also have, my family has fostered a kid, but also a big part of my experience has been with my facilitating, having with gender spectrum of preteens and teens, and a lot of our kids who come through our groups are living in the foster care system and or thankfully have been adopted to forever very accepting families. A lot of them, similar to what has been spoken on by the other amazing panelists, have been not being able to be at home due to their identity. So having to go into the system because of that, and then also experiencing lack of acceptance and not feeling safe in the foster care system. So not feeling safe anywhere. And so they come to our groups. Thankfully, we don't need consent from a guardian. They can come on their own. And so we hear these terrible stories of how they're yelled at for their identities, they're abused for their identities, they're having to be chameleons, as Weston was saying. So it's really great to be able to see all of you here wanting to learn, and this is a good part of what's coming from this, is having these discussions and hoping to help create change. So thank you all for being here.
Thanks.
And thank you, Allison, for putting gender spectrum in there. I appreciate that.
And so we'll get to this. There's a question. What were some of the helpful healing moments, times in your journey while you were in care? So that's a 2-part question. One was, what are some of the most helpful things? And then what has been most helpful since aging out? For those of you who have. Weston?
I would say for me, I think that, you know, given my situation being from a very rural community, and then like, you know, almost to the last moment trying to find me a placement, and my case come across my dad's file, I think that although it took some time, I think that it was really important for me that they were able to find, an organization in Kansas City that was actually working within LGBTQ affairs. And that's how I was, matched and placed with my dad's. And so I think that that was important, but I think that had they done that in the beginning, I think that things would have been very different within my foster care journey.
Great, thanks. There's a number of folks have also been putting in some of the things wrong. Let me see if anybody else wants to answer that question. What were the things that helped while you were in care? And then I want to also come back to the concept of intersectionality. That's I think Justina was also writing about that, and a number of folks have been putting a note in there, that the recognition that, LGBTQ plus is one element of our identities, but there's all these other elements also that are equally as important, and how does that play out? Does anybody want to answer first the question about what helped, and then we'll come back to the question around intersectionality? All right. Davi, did you want to say something? I saw you took, no, okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about intersectional identities and how that plays out for people, that that nobody is one thing. Everybody is made up of all the different parts of their identities, and their experiences in the world differ based on what combinations of identities they have. And you can't prioritize one over the other because they all matter. So somebody want to share about that?
I can.
Yeah.
So I think this is something that I've struggled with a lot myself, like, being, someone who identifies as LGBTQ, someone who's Black and also white. I think that I'm constantly like battling with my own identity, because I feel like I'm, sometimes I feel like I'm, too Black with the white crowd, or I'm too white with the Black crowd, so like there's like all of these different things that I've, tried to navigate within my own identities, with these three things that I've, that I've been, placed with. And I think that like my dad, like my adopted dads now have really showed me that I'm not just Black, I'm not just white, but I'm Western. And so although we identify as these places, like we're all just human beings who, the human experience is so important if we want to connect and network and like build relationships. And so why are we constantly having to feel like we have to like express our identities? I think that although our identities are who we are, it isn't something that we should always have to disclose. And I think that for me especially, I feel that, being gay, like, I don't feel like being gay defines who I am, but it's a part of who I've become, just because, me being gay and being placed in foster care has, like, that's like what resulted me to being in care. But I think that, being adopted and being resilient and sharing my story, it's allowed me to kind of navigate and deal with all of those things that I have been discriminated against for. So,
okay. Justina, you're nodding your head. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely hear that. With intersectionality, as someone like from Houston, Texas originally, and I just moved here to Richmond, Virginia about 3 years ago, and experiencing what it feels like to live in the Confederate as like a Black trans person that's like actively transitioning has been very interesting. And so like the intersection conversation is always important to me. It's a conversation that I have with other young people that are kind of like in my group when we're doing advocacy work, because, even as advocates, as activists, however you want to label yourself, parts of our identities matter, right? So when I show up into a space and I say Black Lives Matter versus, if Weston showed up into a space and said Black Lives Matter, that would be received in two different ways, right? Because of the things that neither Weston or I have control over, right? Which is like colorism and all of these other things that are so beyond us, right? When we're just advocating for Black lives, but the responses of folks, may be more agitated, I may be more aggressive, and so that really is something that I constantly have to grapple with when I do my advocacy work, because I do say that I am, I'm direct, I'm sharp, and so that can be stressful though, because I'm passionate about the work that I do. And when other people have that same energy and don't have my identities, they're kind of applauded and awarded, and, but it's like, I'm a Black AFAB, born as female, you know, Black, trans, non-binary person. You know, a lot of people, that's my experience, you know, who's on testosterone. That's my specific experience, and all of those identities intersect in how I show up. So, yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Justina. Nakaya, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just to piggyback off of what's already been said, like, for me, I didn't even realize that I could explore my LGBTQ identity because I was so like hyper focused on my Black identity. Group home, I was in this majority white, super rural area, and it was around the time that Trump got elected. So it was not the best time. I was constantly being like racially profiled and stuff by my peers, and I was constantly just feeling like it didn't even matter if I was any LGBTQ identity, because all I would ever be seen as was my Blackness. And also, but exploring my identity and like as I've gotten older has led me to feel even more connected to my Blackness because of learning about the decolonization of gender and sexuality and feeling more connected to my ancestors and my heritage. So it's been like a double-sided coin in that. And it's also just been really hard also, like Justina was saying, navigating activist spaces, because you never know, like, as much as we want to be intersectional, like I'm all about intersectionality, I'm an intersectional feminist, intersectionality is my middle name, but like realizing the realisticness of being able to go into activist spaces all the time and expect intersectionality is always usually disheartening. If I were to go to an LGBTQ group and be able to talk about trans and sexuality issues without being able to talk about like the major role in the disbalance within each of those communities, because my white peers do not face the same specific form of discriminations that I do. Also being able to talk about my experience with misogyny, even though I'm non-binary, I still am perceived as a woman, which can be a privilege and can also be super annoying because I still have to experience the misogyny and the misgendering of being perceived as a woman. And there's just like so many different things that go into just trying to exist and advocate and be seen and respected that I feel like need to be explored and taken seriously. I think we all want to brush it under the rug and act as though we can all be connected all the time, which we want to be, like we should be. But at the end of the day, we kind of can't until we start receiving like talks about privilege and talks about imbalance, you know what I'm trying to say, like just talking about the disparities between each other, the gaps that are there before we try to build a bridge over them. I think we need to acknowledge that in spaces more, especially within the foster care system where youth of color are overrepresented.
Yeah. And you know, the point about, you know, activist spaces and also I think support spaces not being intersectional, you know, disproportionately impacts obviously LGBTQ youth of color, Black and brown youth in particular. And we don't talk about that enough in the, you know, like that's almost a beginning conversation. Like that's a conversation you have to have right up front. You know, and too often it doesn't happen. You know, a lot of the groups that I've been in, you know, as a much older white lesbian, you know, in a lot of those white spaces, you know, talking about white privilege, talking about, you know, white supremacy, and it's like people don't want to talk about it. And so, but if you don't talk about it, you can't change it. And if you can't change it, then we can't really create a space that supports and affirms, you know, queer youth of color. So thank you for that, Nakai. That was great. Other people want to add to that or comment more about that? There's a number of questions that have come up in the chat room. So I'm going to go back up and see if I can. There's just a lot of them. So one person asked, did you have someone who advocated on your behalf when you were in the child welfare system, like a court-appointed special advocate or a guardian ad litem? Did anybody have an advocate who that really spoke for their particular needs and issues?
I would say for me, like I had a guardian ad litem, but I only saw him when I was in the court. Like I never really remember an experience where we talked about me being gay and getting the support and the resources that I needed. So therefore I had one, but I didn't feel that they were an advocate, if that makes any sense at all.
Right, right. And in the work that I did, I worked with a lot of guardian ad litems, and some were really advocates for their LGBTQ kids and youth, and many had just the same biases and prejudices and imposition of belief systems as, you know, as anybody else. So I think that that's a piece. Does anybody else want to add to that? There was another question up here that I wanted to see if we could get, you know, everybody's perspective on. How should I support LGBTQ plus youth differently from other youth? What additional supports are needed? And there's an underlying question there, because it sounds like, how does differentiating help? How does differentiating help, and where can it become harmful? And so there's an underlying concern there. It sounds like that if you acknowledge and support one element of a person's identity, that differentiates them. I'm not really sure, but what do people, any thoughts about that? How do you support LGBTQ youth differently?
I guess I can go. I feel bad. I feel like I keep trying to answer all these questions, but I feel like for me, I think that it's important to know and to do your research and to be aware. I think that it would be really important for a youth to see, oh, well, you know, they kind of like know where I'm coming from. Like they're listening to me, they understand where I'm coming from. You know, they've done the research, you know, they know that I am an LGBTQ person, you know, they're serving me, and they kind of already know, you know, so they're kind of already, they have the education. And I think that it's also important to know too, when you're serving LGBTQ people, you know, youth and within the child welfare system, is to know that nearly 30% of of youth within the system are LGBTQ. So you kind of have to understand that although, you know, there's youth who don't identify as LGBTQ that have trauma, there's also LGBTQ youth who are going to almost be under supported, you know, if not more. You know, and I think that there's studies out there that show that ones that are LGBTQ youth do struggle more trauma within the system than their, you know, peers who don't identify that way. So I think that that's something to also already know too, is to be aware of that and then figure out how to support and provide those resources to them. I think it's also important to just be a listening ear. I think that's important too.
Anybody else want to add to that? Davi?
Hi, I just would like to say that a way to support LGBTQ plus youth is, as Weston said, piggybacking everything that Weston said, but yeah, being a listening ear, compassionately showing unconditional support, doing your research, and sharing that with the youth, being transparent. I know for me that knowing what they were doing to try to help me, and also with the kids that I work with, hearing those stories, and just trying to speak with them every step of the way and asking them, how does that feel for them? And really checking in with them, and asking, and yeah, letting them know that you're there for them. And also to, if they have things they aren't comfortable sharing, to let them know that that is okay also. But yeah, unconditionally being there for them and showing love, support, care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anybody else want to add anything? Justina or Nakaya? Justina?
Yeah, I just want to say, like, I say this in a lot of spaces, that at the end of the day, like, we're all human beings. Nobody studies, you know, folks who are considered to be most privileged, you know, like they are not studied, and it's not a degree that you get, people are able to get anti-racist credentials, they're able to be LGBTQ affirming, but we are people. And I think that when you are able to think about that first, you'll be able to support a young person regardless. So I'd like to even kind of like reframe that question. It's just like, how do you support young people first? You know, because I think that what kind of makes people, I don't want to speak for the person that asked that question, so please don't take it this way. Mm-hmm. But what makes people nervous sometimes about LGBTQ identities is because of how we demand the respect. You know, we ask certain questions because we have to see the world in a specific way. Some of the stuff that is not visible to some of you on this call is extremely visible to those of us on this panel, that we can't look around and can't get past, you know, so because of oppression, because of all of the things in the world. So I think that when you just take a second and you think about, like, when you're coming to folks like that, how would you support them? Like, what would that look like for you? And think about what makes you uncomfortable when talking to LGBTQ youth. Like, really sit and think, like, is it because you feel like you don't know any? Then that's no shade. That's insecurity, right? That's the ego and all of that. And I don't think it's fair that young people have to suffer for that. So that's what I want to give.
Like Nikaya agrees to that. Anybody have anything else they want to add?
I would just like to literally drive Justina's point home. It's literally, for me, always about humanizing the process. Like, we're literally people. So I think that fear and that walking on eggshells energy of making mistakes is honestly kind of, it throws the youth off. I think it makes it seem like that support that you want to give is disingenuous because you're looking at us less like people that you want to take care of. It feels like it's more like we're watching Meerkat Manor on Animal Planet, if that makes sense. Like, it's becoming like observational, scientific, clinical. We all just want to feel like we can be able to talk about ourselves and our identities casually. And I think having that aspect of just approaching it the way you would approach any other person and be like, oh, who are you dating? You know, just being able to reframe your language around human interactions and just making it as casual for them as possible. Like, for me, that was what made the hugest difference when I was a young person, was just being able to talk casually about my identity without feeling like it was now my job to be the professor of every LGBTQ person ever, or I was now gonna have to defend myself to this person who I didn't know how they were gonna react. And, you know, just being able to be like, yeah, I got a partner, or I'm doing this, or I'm exploring different pronouns and or I want to change my way of dressing. Like, I think that casualness is what means so much to us. So yeah, like, just, you know, So yeah, literally just everything that they just.
Yeah. And I think I love that the concept of casualness, that having the ability to just be comfortable with the conversations and the information that young people bring you, and being open to it. You know, I have one of the examples I sometimes give, and I don't know if this is helpful or not, but I'm a lesbian for a living. Right. So like, I just do this for my job. And so, you know, I'm pretty much as out as you could possibly be, but I still have to come out to people that I don't know. Right. And so I tend to come out similar to what Nakai was just talking about, where I just say, you know, my wife, you know, and I just, you know, like that. And but it's amazing how sometimes, my best example, if you say to somebody, what'd you do over the weekend? And they say, I went to the movies. The next question is, oh yeah, what did you see? Right? There's a conversation. It's a conversation. I say, oh, my wife and I went to the movies, and they say, oh, right? like I just told them what we were doing in our bedroom. Like, come on, right? That's so that comfort, I think, is a really a key. It's just such a great point. All right. Anybody have anything to add before I go back to looking at the questions? Does the panel think I should be trained to support LGBTQ youth, or can I just have an open heart and mind and be available?
Go
ahead.
Do you want to go? Because I have been talking.
No, everybody's talking. Go for it.
Okay. I just want to say that as someone who as someone who's gone through trainings, facilitated them as like a youth lived experience, and as like a lived experience service provider who has had to go through them, I will say that I think that people use like LGBTQ trainings as a scapegoat sometimes. I feel like you can have an open heart and find literally hundreds of trainings online for the free on YouTube. True Colors United has really cool stuff. Human Rights Campaign has really cool stuff. Trevor Project. Like, it's just so much stuff you can find that you can subscribe to in your email that could take you a lot farther than a training that comes, once every so often.
Mhm.
And then I will say too that people can kind of get caught up in their heads about being trained, like I've worked at organizations that have been like the leading LGBTQ youth organization and has been uninterested in participating in other LGBTQ trainings just to brush up on their own skill because of the whole, well, we do this work, but you insular, right? So it's like, I think that training and all of that is super important, but you could do a lot because just by, like everyone has been saying, even just having casual conversation with young people, because they like actually, it's like you definitely don't want to ask those who are the marginalized folks to do the labor and the educating and stuff. But young people really are like hype about explaining identity because it is such a rich and layered thing. And like Nakaya was saying, it goes to our ancestors. It's just so much stuff to really unpack that I found to even like help my 85-year-old Baptist granny. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I think that you could definitely be impactful to a young person without going to a training. But if that's something that you want to do, definitely, but you can definitely hit the ground running right now with that open heart.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think it's also, I think that there's certain basics that people really should know, like the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity, because people collapse those two together all the time. And then you're not really being able to hear what the person is saying. And then the first thing that comes out of your mouth is going to collapse them. And then they're going to know like, okay, this person doesn't know anything. So, you have to have a set of basics. And then from the basics, it's really about being open, respectful, and listening. That's really a key point. Somebody asked, there was another question up here that I thought that the panel, sorry, they're going by so fast. It's hard to keep up with them. And a lot of folks are just affirming the responses of the panelists. I don't know, I'm looking at this. Anybody have anything they want to say while I'm looking through these and see if there's any? Yeah, Davi?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that I think, it all starts with having an open heart, compassion, love. And then I think being able to go to trainings and learning the differences between gender identity, sexual orientation, and then keeping up with the lingo and learning all the different letters that get added to the acronyms and the meanings. Yet with that, everyone has their own meaning for those different letters to the acronym as well. So it's I think learning the basics and keeping up with what's being taught and what is going on in the world in the real current times, and then also just being an ear, being an advocate, being present, being responsive and receptive to your young person that you're working with, hearing their stories, hearing what's going on for them. So I think it's both very much, but a lot can go with an open heart and unconditional love and support. Go a long way.
So one person said, I feel I'm constantly navigating my own identity, and my partner and I are looking to be foster parents for LGBTQ youth. I'm worried that this might be felt as instability by the youth, and I'm wondering if y'all think this could be damaging. So is it damaging for foster parents to also be exploring their identities while also fostering? Nakaya had a strong response to that, so let's go to Nakaya first.
I have strong responses to everything. I would say that, hold on one second. Can y'all hear an echo? I can hear an echo. Y'all can hear it? Okay, cool. Well, so I was gonna say that I think that you exploring your own identity is less as seen as unstable and more seen as like authenticity. I think a lot of the times being open about the fact that you're still learning and you're still growing about your own stuff can be seen as like a way to mess up the kid that you're raising, because you're like thinking that it's going to be you bringing them to a home that's unstable and has no like solid foundation. But I think it honestly drives home the point that you continue to learn and grow as you get older. I think that we're, as a society, constantly fed this lie that like, you figure out who you're going to be, and that's just who you are forever. You get one career, you get one personality, you get one set of values, and that's all. And you're either going to be in this binary of good or bad, and that's just who you are forever, and that's your destiny. But I think as humans, we're constantly learning and growing, and as much as people don't want to admit it, you're not going to be the same person that you are at like 30 as you are at like 50, and 30 is like seen as like the adult age, but like we're all just kind of people learning and growing throughout life. And to be authentic about your journey with your youth, I think would make them trust you even more. I feel like for me, I would be super trusting and like happy to be with a parent who's learning and growing at around the same time that I am, especially because I feel like that makes you so much more open to receiving the youth as they learn and grow.
That's great. Davi?
Yeah, I think it's beautifully said, Nikaya, and I also think it's an invitation for the young people, the young person, to be able to explore who they are in every way, shape, and form, and also knowing that, yeah, nothing is set in stone. We're always evolving, we're always growing, we're always changing as we're learning about ourselves and as the world is evolving. I think a big thing is that it is a beautiful invitation for them to be able to know that no matter what they're going through, no matter what they're experiencing or how they're evolving, they're loved and supported. And yeah, it's a beautiful invitation. Yeah.
So we're starting to run down on time. There's going to be, at 3 o'clock, we're going to end, and there'll be a Q&A part that people are able to stay for. But so maybe we could do just one last round. If you had one piece of advice that you wanted to give to the people on this call, what's the one thing that you want them to walk away with about serving the LGBTQ youth that they serve?
Yeah, I actually wanted to answer that question. I want to highlight the question that Katie asked about, as former foster youth and people of color, what are our thoughts on these calls to abolish, reform foster care and adoption? And that's my answer, to be honest. Like, I do a lot of focus groups with foster care, youth aging out of foster care, and all of the conversations are about abolishing it, to be honest, but if not, reforming it. So I think that my piece of advice is to approach, when you leave this place, to approach your work in that way. Look at what y'all have set up, your infrastructures, whatever, and think about what was said here today, and just, think about, like, since all of the stuff that's happened, like Katie said, so since the murder of George Floyd and other Black and brown bodies, like, start kind of ruminating on that and think about how, kind of to our question at the beginning, how can you support LGBTQ youth through that lens if you're just being this singular person that's trying to reform? How can you reform that, even an individual young person's experience? So that's what I would.
Great, thanks. Davi, Nikaya, or Weston, last word?
Yeah, I would like to say too that, I think it's really important to take yourself kind of out of the situation and put yourself in our shoes and understand, like, what would you have wanted as a child? This is completely like LGBTQ not related, but, as a child, what would you have wanted, And so I think that that's so important for you to think about too, like LGBTQ youth aren't going anywhere. We're here. We want to be loved and affirmed for who we are. And so kind of think about like what you wanted as a child as well too. And I also want to urge people to, kind of understand that there's more importance to, personal beliefs. And I think that, we're not changing or asking you to like change your personal religious beliefs, but understand that love is love, and we all are deserving of affirming, supportive, and amazing families.
Thank you, Weston.
Thank you.
Davi, Nikaya?
Yeah, I know I've been saying this a lot, but I think just really being open, hearing, receptive, transparent with the research you're doing, how you're helping them, being loving, compassionate. Yeah, I think, as I've been saying throughout the whole panel.
Thank you. Nikaya? Last words?
For me,
Your internet is getting a little.
yeah, it was the wrong one. Clicked on the wrong button. Can y'all hear me good?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So for me, it's like literally what Dava was saying, the same thing I've been driving home this entire panel: authenticity and humanization. Just making sure that you're coming to this work with an authentic point of view, and that you're not doing it because you want to be Captain Save a Child, or because you want to like feel as though you're absolving your own guilt and like helping youth and like helping these poor charity cases, or that you're going to change the whole system, even because like, you know, we're seeing things are becoming like, people are questioning these old systems that we've always had and wondering if we should reform them or abolish them. And just making sure that you're coming with it, honestly, with the mindset that I like to keep in mind when I'm doing my own work, just the mindset of baton passing, of making the impact that you can, so that you're making sustainable impact, so that the next person that comes behind you can just keep the ball rolling, and that we're taking care of these youth and treating them like people and not like resumes or, you know, charity cases, and just making sure that you're doing it in an authentic way, I think is what I would want to drive home. And also that this work is important because almost every youth I've ever met is gay. So that means you're going to get like a bunch of gay children. And it's important that you know how to learn about their identities, queer, trans, what have you, like they're overrepresented in systems of care, and that this work is honestly not optional. And I appreciate y'all for taking the time to participate in this panel. And I hope that, you know, y'all got something out of it.
Thank you. So Allison, I think they're going to put the evaluation form in the chat box again, so that people can link right to that. It is a little bit after 3 now, so we are gonna, you know, for people who had to leave before the panel itself is over, and what we're gonna do now with the last 15 minutes or so is just answer the questions that are coming up in the chat room. So for those of you who, yep.
I was going to chime in with a question that I saw from the Q&A really quick, Robin.
Sure.
And this is a question we get all the time, so I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts. And it's really around talking to young people about Soji, so talking about sexual orientation, gender identity, and just asking for you all to share some examples of times when you've had conversations about Soji with your workers, and what felt good about those conversations and the way that they were handled, what felt, you know, natural, and just like you're just having a conversation, what didn't feel good, because there's a lot of anxiety and kind of hesitation to initiate conversations around Soji, I think. And so some folks just wanting to hear some experiences that you've had related to talking about Soji, and positive experiences if you have examples, so that folks can hear from those.
Right. So who would like to go first?
I'll go. Who is that? They can go.
It was you can go. You're totally fine.
Okay.
Yeah,
I was just gonna say, like I said earlier, no one really asked me about my identity until I was literally about to age out. And it was when I was about to age out that someone asked me if I wanted to join this group that we were having at my local DSS. It was a support group for LGBTQ identifying youth. And they were just basically assigned to hand out kind of these flyers that evaluated their youth identity and whether or not they'd be interested in participating. So my worker handed me the flyer, and she was like, "Oh, you're gay?" And I was like, "Yeah." She was like, "Cool." And then we got McDonald's. So that's my favorite experience, because that's all I ever wanted. I just wanted someone to ask and care, and then for it to be casual. And I had joined the group, and it was really great. And now I work with it. So it worked out great for me. If that's what y'all want to do, I think it'll be nice.
All right, anybody else?
Yeah, I would say from like, I kind of relate to that. Like, I never really like got questions on like my identity until I was like placed with my dad's, and then realized that like I'm a very like androgynous person. Like I wear masculine clothes, female, like I just am very like gender bending, quote unquote. But I would say that, you know, it really makes a difference when there's no pressure and you allow the child to come to you. You can ask questions that aren't like you're like forcing it out of them, but, you know, give them and open up a space for them to come to you. And I think that it's so important to, you know, being able to create that safe space for them to be able to feel like they're welcoming and that they can come to you and talk about those kind of things. Because I feel like, you know, identity with, you know, there's so many different ways that ones can identify. And I think that, as we're constantly growing and evolving as human beings, I think that it's just important to give that space, because, some people identify differently, and that's completely okay.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
I was just gonna say, I think just coming from a lens of someone who like has worked outside of systems as a service provider and had to work with other people inside of the system as service providers, I think that some good experiences that people end up having, right, is kind of what we talked about at the very beginning, right? And no one, again, I can be direct, no one take offense, but like it's one of those like the bars on the floor situations, like when you get a sheet of paper and it doesn't say preferred, right? Mm-hmm. So sometimes like that is just where it starts. Like it's like, all right, y'all seem to be on it. Okay. And then the other piece is like mainly like Weston and Nikaya and everyone saying like, let the person come to you. And because as someone who came out and people was just like, oh, I knew you was gay, and said some of the ugliest stuff, it like ugly, so it's like, keep that in mind. My advice is, to be honest, to be constantly present of who you're around. You never know someone's story. I think that a lot of the times the service providers, you're seeing a lot of different folks. You're around, people come in and they have to wait on you, or they talk to the person at the front. They can hear. So it's like I think it is always too about being extremely aware of like your surroundings, the things that you say. Sometimes we say things that are outdated, and a person can lock up, just from that. And it's just like, what questions would you want to be asked if you were a young person? And I also find that giving a little context is also helpful. So sometimes if I get a sheet of paper and it asks me way too many questions, and I'm like, for what? Like, why do you need to know that? No, if you can just say that. Sometimes people say, well, oh, if you check this box, then that'll give me the opportunity to put your name here so you can get resources for this particular thing. Bet, cool. But let me know that, so and I think that really breaks down a barrier too. If you have to do an intake with some person and you're going down a line of very archaic questions, taking this conversation we've had and your modern interpretation or whatever on your work would be profound for young people.
Mm-hmm. Justina, someone asked in the chat room whether or not they could get access to one of the groups that you are running.
Yeah,
so I don't know if you want to put that in the chat room.
Yes, I will get some links to it.
Another question that I saw, someone asked, what's the best way that foster parents can support LGBTQ youth who are aging out of care? So in that transition period before you age out, what are the ways that foster parents can be the most helpful?
For me, what was really impactful was knowing that I was still going to be able to have that support system, whether or not I was still in care. So if you do see your youth as like someone that you would want to support, I feel like driving that home for them is important. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of foster youth are very like, I'm like a bird, I only fly away. Like we just kind of go in and out of places and scenarios and communities and just don't like realize that we have people that are kind of there for us that aren't just gonna be gone just because we're gone from that space. So like having just that support, no matter where you are, no matter where you live, like knowing that, okay, well, if you ever have any trouble, you can call me. If you need help, if you want to know things about like housing and finances, and like you take your car to the auto shop and they tell you need a part, you don't know what that means. Like, just having parents that I feel like the way children who go off to college or who move out normally still have parents, I think would really be nice for them.
That's great. Anybody else? How could foster parents support youth who are aging out? I think that's so important too, Nikaya, because you think about, I've never been in foster care, but when I went away to college, I knew that if I got in trouble, I had somebody that I could call and go back to. And a lot of times our young people in care don't have that. And I know, like if you're a provider who's never been who doesn't have this lived experience, what would it have been like for you as 17 or 18-year-old to be totally on your own, trying to figure all these things out? I'm 66 years old, and when I get sick, I still wish I could call my mother, and so it's human to want continued connection. And I think we have to just really pay attention to that. Other questions in there? I know Allison was looking to see if there were other questions to highlight.
I saw one that I wanted to answer.
Oh, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Someone asked, how come most of the youth in foster care identify as queer?
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to clarify that it's less that most of the youth in care identify as queer, and more so that a lot of parents in these communities don't know about LGBTQ identities. So when their youth starts to express that, their immediate reaction is to get them out of the home.
Mm-hmm.
So it's less about like foster youth just being super gay and more about LGBTQ youth being overrepresented because their parents don't know how to support them.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thanks. Anybody else? And to folks who are missing things in the chat room, Allison has noted that HRC will send this out to folks, that they download the chat after the event. So, that will be provided to folks, and there's a lot of links in there. As we said at the beginning, there's a lot of expertise among the audience as well, and people have been adding information in the chat rooms. Any other questions that you think we should be sure to cover before we end?
Is there anything that the panelists wanted to have a chance to share that you haven't had a chance to share before we wrap up? We have a few more minutes.
Just to throw in second, in the Q&A, someone asked if there was someone from the panel that could come to their training, and I don't know should I just send them? Would that be something that you would respond to, Allison? It's in the Q&A part, not the.
Yep. Yeah, I already responded to that one, and we can learn more and then definitely make some connections.
Anything else that other people want to add before we close? We've got about 2 more minutes.
Lots of appreciation in the chat for you all. So I'm sure you're reading, and I hope that you're allowing yourself to soak that in.
So I just want to say one quick thing. I felt like this was such an honor for me to be able to work with this team of folks, that I learned a lot. I was impressed over and over and over again. And I just so appreciate your willingness to put yourself out there to make a difference for other people. And I want to acknowledge that, because, what you're doing is not that easy, to share personal stories and to be vulnerable in front of people that you don't know. And I just want you to know how appreciated you are. So thank you. All right, there's a few things. Mostly it's thank you for sharing. Thank you for living your truth unapologetically. World changers. All right. So we're down to 1 minute left. Anybody have anything they want to say in the 1 minute we got left? We could just keep reading y'all were fabulous. Whatever. Thanks to each of you. Thank you so much for participating in the discussion, being willing to share your experiences and thoughts. So
lots of fans who want to hear more from you.
Yep,
all. So
lots of fans.
We'll
What's
definitely
their Cash App so we can buy them coffee?
That is an important point. We are, just to be explicit, we are compensating our panelists for their time. And if you are engaging young leaders in similar ways, please be sure that you are budgeting for compensation.
Mm-hmm.
with that, I just want to, on behalf of HRC and All Children, All Families, thank you all again so very much for your time, and everyone for joining us. More than almost 240 people stuck around for the full hour and 15 minutes. And like Robin, I learned so much from what you shared today. And just thank you all. And please take care, be safe,